The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical lullaby above the empty police station bench where 8-year-old Nora slept, her wild red curls spilling across the cracked vinyl. Officer Amanda Hayes draped her jacket over the child's small frame as darkness pressed against the windows for the second night. Outside, in the streets of this forgotten town, Nora's mother wandered somewhere beyond reach, beyond help, leaving her daughter to wait for a rescue that would come from men who'd been searching for 3 years. Nora stirred as morning light crept through the station windows, her fingers instinctively reaching for the photograph tucked in her jacket pocket. Captain Sean Fitzpatrick stared back from the creased military portrait, his smile frozen in a moment before war had taken him and grief had destroyed the woman he'd married. The child whispered to the image as she had for 4 years, telling her father about the strange place where she'd spent 2 nights, about the officer who brought her crackers and juice, about the hollow promise she kept making that her mother would return. "She always comes back," Nora said to the empty room, but her voice carried no conviction. It echoed off the cinder-block walls like a prayer nobody believed anymore. Officer Hayes emerged from the back office, her face carrying the weight of a phone call she'd just completed. Behind her came Mrs. Darla Pierce, the CPS worker whose sensible shoes and tired eyes had seen too many children like Nora. The woman carried a folder thick with forms that would transform a daughter into a case number, a family into failure. "Sweetheart," Mrs. Pierce began, settling onto the bench with practiced gentleness. "We've tried everything to find your mother, but I need to take you somewhere safe now." Nora's fingers tightened around the photograph. Her body went rigid, that learned stillness of children who understand that resistance changes nothing. But then something broke inside her. Some dam she'd maintained through 2 years of making her own meals and putting herself to bed and pretending everything was fine. "Daddy wouldn't want this." The words came out strangled, desperate. He said soldiers take care of each other. He promised his friends would always be there. He promised. Officer Hayes felt something crack in her chest. She'd made an unauthorized call yesterday, something that would probably get her reprimanded. She'd contacted a military liaison office, mentioned Sean Fitzpatrick's name, asked if anyone knew about his family. It had been a shot in the dark, a foolish hope. The answer came with the sound of thunder. The rumble started low, distant, like a storm rolling across the plains. But storms didn't move in formation. Storms didn't make the coffee cups vibrate on the desk or the front windows rattle in their frames. Officer Hayes moved to the window and felt her breath catch. Motorcycles. 17 of them, moving down Main Street in perfect formation. Chrome gleamed in the morning sun. Leather vests bore patches of service, of brotherhood, of debts never forgotten. At the front rode a man whose face carried the map of Afghanistan's dust and America's neglect, whose vest displayed medals alongside club colors. The town of Millbrook emerged from homes and shops to watch the procession. Mrs. Harriet Thompson clutched her purse tighter. Old Henry Walsh pulled his grandson closer. They saw threat where none existed, danger in men who'd given everything for the flag that hung limp outside the police station. Derek Lawson killed his engine outside the station door. Behind him, 16 brothers did the same, the sudden silence more powerful than the roar had been. He'd carried guilt for 4 years, survivor's weight that pressed down with every breath. Sean Fitzpatrick had thrown himself on an IED that should have killed 3 men. Should have killed Derek. And for 4 years, Derek had been trying to find Sean's family, to fulfill the promise made in a firebase half a world away. "Stay here, Nora," Officer Hayes said softly. But the child had already seen the medals through the window. She'd already recognized something in the way these men moved. That military bearing her father had carried, that sense of purpose and mission. Derek pushed through the door, and the station suddenly felt smaller. He stood 6'3", with shoulders that had carried wounded brothers through hostile territory. His hands were scarred from combat and mechanics, and the hard life that came after serving. But his eyes found Nora on the bench, and something gentle in his weathered face. "I'm looking for Nora Fitzpatrick," he said, though he already knew. The red curls were Sean's. The defiant set to her small jaw was Sean's. The photograph clutched in her hands was Sean's. Mrs. Pierce stepped forward, placing herself between Derek and the child. "And who exactly are you?" Derek reached into his vest. Officer Hayes tensed, hand moving toward her weapon, and withdrew a leather wallet worn soft from years of carrying. From it, he pulled a photograph. 3 men in desert camouflage, arms around each other's shoulders, faces young and whole before the desert had marked them. Sean Fitzpatrick stood in the middle, grinning like death was impossible. "I'm the man Captain Fitzpatrick saved," Derek said quietly. "I'm the brother who's been looking for his family for 3 years. I'm the man who made him a promise the day before he died." He pulled out more papers. Legal documents prepared by a lawyer who'd grown tired of Derek's obsession. Emergency custody paperwork. Letters of recommendation from military commanders who knew what brotherhood meant. Proof of stable housing and legitimate income. Bank statements showing an account he'd been building for years marked for Sean's family. Mrs. Pierce's professional skepticism wavered as she examined the documents. Everything was legitimate. Everything was prepared. This man had been planning for this moment for years, hoping against hope he'd find the family his captain had loved. "The law requires—" she began, but Derek was already kneeling. He knelt before Nora the way soldiers knelt before their wounded. With respect, with reverence, with the understanding that some debts transcended regulation and bureaucracy. From his vest, he removed the bronze star he'd been awarded for the action that had nearly killed him. The battle where Sean had made his final choice. "Your daddy saved my life," Derek said, his voice cracking on words he'd practiced 1,000 times. "We were in Afghanistan, and there was an explosion. Your daddy saw it before anyone else. He pushed me and 2 other men out of the way. He took the blast that was meant for us." Nora stared at the medal, then at her father's photograph. Her young mind tried to bridge the impossible distance between a man who'd existed in her daily life and a hero who'd died for strangers half a world away. "I made him a promise," Derek continued. "The night before it happened, we were talking about families, about what we'd go home to. Your daddy talked about you, about his little girl with red hair like his. He made me promise that if anything happened to him, his brothers would take care of his family. I've been looking for you for 3 years, Nora. I'm late, but I'm here now." Through the window, the other riders stood in silent formation. Each one had known Sean. Each one had been shaped by his sacrifice. They'd formed a motorcycle club after coming home, bonded by the debt they could never fully repay. They'd called themselves the Sentinels because Sean had been watching over them that day, and they'd sworn to watch over his family if they could ever find them. Nora's fingers traced the metal star, feeling the weight of it. "You knew my daddy?" "He was my brother," Derek said simply. "And that makes you family." Mrs. Pierce examined the custody papers again, her professional detachment crumbling. The law was clear. Emergency custody could be granted to family, and in the absence of biological family, the law recognized other bonds, military bonds. "Brotherhood forged in fire." "Mr. Lawson," she said carefully, "you understand this isn't temporary? If I grant this custody, you're responsible for this child's welfare. Her education, her emotional needs. The courts will require—" "I understand," Derek interrupted. "My wife Claire and I have been preparing for this. We have a room ready. We've been ready for 3 years." The other riders entered the station now, filling it with leather and chrome and the scent of highway dust. Among them was Marcus Thompson, a medic who'd served 3 tours. There was Preacher, Elijah Stone, a chaplain's assistant who still carried a Bible. There was Wheels, Samantha Cruz, one of the few women who'd served in their unit, who'd held Sean's hand as he died. They came bearing gifts purchased that morning as they'd ridden through the dawn. A stuffed bear, a children's book, a small leather jacket with legacy stitched on the back. They laid them before Nora like offerings at a shrine, these hard men reduced to awkward tenderness by a child who carried their captain's eyes. "Where's my mom?" Nora asked, and the question hung in the air like smoke. Officer Hayes knelt beside Derek. "We found her this morning, honey. She's in a hospital getting help. She's sick, not with a cold or flu, but sick in a way that needs special doctors. Mr. Lawson's lawyer has arranged for her to go to a treatment facility. A good one." Derek nodded. "I'm paying for her care, Nora. Your daddy would want her to get better, and when she's ready, when she's well, you can see her. But right now, you need somewhere safe, somewhere you don't have to take care of yourself anymore." The child's facade cracked then. The careful composure she'd maintained for 2 years shattered. She was 8 years old and she was tired. Tired of being hungry. Tired of being afraid. Tired of being the adult when adults had failed her. Derek caught her as she folded, held her as she finally cried. He'd carried wounded men through firefights. He'd performed battlefield triage with hands slick with blood. But holding this small child who shook with grief and relief tested him in ways combat never had. "I've got you," he whispered into her red curls. "We've got you. You're not alone anymore." Mrs. Pierce signed the emergency custody papers with a hand that trembled slightly. Officer Hayes wiped her eyes and pretended the station was dusty. The riders stood in formation, each one remembering the man who'd bought them this moment with his life. Outside, Millbrook's residents watched as Derek carried Nora to his motorcycle. Mrs. Thompson, who'd clutched her purse, felt shame creep up her neck as she saw the medals on his vest. Mr. Walsh, who'd pulled his grandson closer, recognized the combat ribbons from his own service in Vietnam. The town began to understand that they'd judged wrong, seen threat where only honor existed. Derek settled Nora in the sidecar he'd installed 2 years ago, hoping he'd need it. Mouse buckled her in with gentle hands that had saved lives on operating tables in Kandahar. Preacher placed the stuffed bear in her arms. Wheels adjusted the small helmet to fit Nora's head, her own eyes red with tears she wouldn't shed. "Where are we going?" Nora asked, her voice small inside the helmet. "Home," Derek said simply. "We're taking you home." The motorcycles started in sequence, a rolling thunder that announced transformation. They moved through Millbrook in formation, this convoy of warriors surrounding their captain's daughter. People lined the streets now, not in fear but in recognition. Flags appeared in windows. Veterans saluted. The town bore witness to a promise fulfilled. They rode for 3 hours through highways and back roads until they reached the compound where the Sentinels had built their clubhouse. It sat on 10 acres of land purchased with pooled savings, a place where broken soldiers had learned to live again. But adjacent to the clubhouse stood a house, a real house with a white fence and a swing set and curtains in the windows. Claire Lawson waited on the porch, this woman who'd married Derek's demons and loved him through the nightmares. She'd never met Sean Fitzpatrick, but she'd lived with his ghost for years, had understood that her husband's heart carried a debt that shaped everything. When Derek had said they needed to prepare a room for a child they might never find, she'd painted it yellow and filled it with hope. "Welcome home, Nora," Claire said, and the child looked up at a woman whose smile held no judgment, no expectation, only acceptance. The room they showed her had bookshelves and a desk and a bed with a quilt covered in stars. On the wall hung a photograph, the same one Nora carried, enlarged and framed. Her father stood surrounded by his brothers, alive and laughing. Beneath it, Derek had mounted Sean's medals, the ones the army had sent. The Purple Heart, the Bronze Star, the honors of a man who'd chosen sacrifice. "This is yours," Derek said. "All of it. Your room, your home, your family." Nora set her small duffel bag. Everything she owned fit inside it, on the bed. She'd lived in chaos for 2 years, never knowing if the lights would stay on or if there'd be food. She'd learned to expect nothing, to protect herself through emotional distance. But standing in this room that strangers had prepared with such care, she felt something dangerous. She felt hope. "Can I really stay?" she whispered. "Forever," Claire said, kneeling beside her. "If you want to. We know we're not your parents. We know we can't replace your daddy or fix your mom, but we can give you a place where you're safe, where you're loved, where you never have to be alone again." That evening, the other Sentinels gathered for a meal. They'd told their own families about Sean's daughter, and the compound filled with people eager to welcome her. Children ran through the grass, other legacy kids, born to soldiers who'd come home changed. Nora watched them with careful eyes, not yet ready to believe this was real. Mouse's daughter approached, 8 years old like Nora, with braids and a gap-toothed smile. "Want to see the treehouse?" she asked. "My dad and the other guys built it. It's pretty cool." Nora looked to Derek, seeking permission for this simple thing, to play, to be a child. He nodded, his throat tight with emotion. And she went, this small girl with red curls, running across grass toward laughter and normalcy. "Sean would have loved this," Wheels said quietly, watching from the porch. He talked about her constantly, showed us pictures until we had them memorized. All he wanted was to get home to his family. He got us home instead, Derek said. This is the least we can do, the absolute least. The weeks that followed brought adjustment. Nora attended the local elementary school, where teachers were briefed about her circumstances. She saw a therapist who specialized in childhood trauma. Claire taught her that adults could be reliable, that meals came regularly, that safety wasn't conditional. Derek taught her about her father, sharing stories of the man who'd been more than a photograph. Some nights, Nora woke from nightmares about being alone again. Claire would come, would sit on the edge of the bed, would stay until sleep returned. Derek installed a nightlight that projected stars on the ceiling, the same stars that had hung over Afghanistan when Sean made his final choice. The Sentinels became her family. Mouse taught her about motorcycles. Preacher taught her card games and terrible jokes. Wheels taught her that women could be strong and soft simultaneously. She learned that family wasn't only blood, it was choice and commitment and showing up. 2 months after her rescue, Derek received word that Lindsay had completed initial treatment. She'd agreed to a year-long program, had started addressing the grief and addiction that had consumed her. Through lawyers, she'd sent a message. She wanted her daughter to be happy, even if that meant being somewhere else. Derek and Claire brought Nora to visit on a sunny afternoon in early spring. The facility was clean and calm, nothing like the chaos that had defined their home before. Lindsay looked different, clearer, though fragile in the way of people rebuilding from rubble. Mother and daughter sat in a garden, supervised but given space. Nora held the photograph of her father between them like a bridge. "I'm sorry," Lindsay said, and the words cost her everything. "I'm sorry I couldn't be what you needed. I'm sorry you had to grow up too fast. I'm sorry your daddy died and I fell apart." Nora stared at this woman who'd given her life and then forgotten how to live. She was 8 years old, too young for this conversation. But she'd been too young for everything that had happened. "Derek says you're sick," Nora said carefully. "That it's not your fault you couldn't take care of me." "It is my fault," Lindsay corrected gently. "I chose not to get help. I chose to let the pain swallow me. But I'm choosing differently now. I'm choosing to get better, even if it's too late for us." "It's not too late," Nora said, surprising herself. "Derek says soldiers don't give up on each other. He says Daddy would want you to get better, so I want that too." They cried together in that garden, mother and daughter connected by love and loss, and the long road of healing. When Derek came to collect Nora, Lindsay thanked him with the dignity of the defeated. "Take care of her," Lindsay said. "Give her everything I couldn't. Let her be a child." "I promise," Derek said, and the weight of that promise settled alongside the one he'd made to Sean. Spring turned to summer. Nora's small leather jacket joined the others hanging in the clubhouse, her presence transforming the space from bachelor refuge to family hall. She learned to ride as a passenger, fearless on the back of Derek's bike, her red curls streaming behind her. The Sentinels rode with this small girl in their midst, their formation protecting her like the most precious cargo. On a warm day in June, Derek brought Nora to the state military cemetery where Sean rested. They'd come before, but today was different. Today, the Sentinels gathered in formation, their motorcycles silent and gleaming. Today, Claire stood beside Derek with documents that made everything official. Today, Nora wore her legacy jacket and carried flowers picked from Claire's garden. The adoption had been finalized that morning. Derek and Claire Lawson were now legally and permanently Nora's parents. The judge had wept during the proceeding, moved by the testimony of men who'd traveled across states to speak about brotherhood and sacrifice and promises kept. Nora knelt before her father's headstone, arranged the flowers with careful hands. The granite was warm from the sun, solid and permanent in a way nothing else had been. "Daddy," she whispered, "your friends found me, just like you promised they would. They came with their motorcycles and their rattles, and they weren't scared of Mom being sick or me being alone. Derek says you saved them in Afghanistan, but I think maybe they're saving me now." She touched the photograph in her pocket. She still carried it everywhere. "I have a room now, with stars on the ceiling like the ones you used to show me. And I have Claire, who makes pancakes and helps with homework. And I have Derek, who tells me stories about you and teaches me to be brave. And I have all the other Sentinels, who say I'm family now." The tears came, but they were different than before. Not the desperate tears of abandonment, but the healing tears of grief acknowledged and shared. "I miss you every day," she continued. "But I'm not alone anymore. You made sure of that. You saved them, and now they're saving me. That's what soldiers do, right? They take care of each other." Derek knelt beside her, his own hand touching the headstone. "We've got her, Captain," he said quietly. "Just like we promised. We'll raise her right. We'll tell her about you. We'll make sure she knows what kind of man her father was. The kind who'd give everything for his brothers. The kind who made us better just by knowing him." Around them, 16 other riders stood at attention. Mouse, who'd tried to save Sean and failed. Preacher, who'd prayed over Sean's body. Wheels, who'd held Sean's hand. Each one marked by that day in the desert, each one shaped by the debt they could never fully repay. But in this moment, with this child who carried Sean's eyes and Sean's courage, they felt the debt shift, not erased. It could never be erased, but transformed from burden to blessing, from guilt to purpose. The memorial service was brief but powerful. Preacher spoke about sacrifice and brotherhood. Mouse read a letter Sean had written before deploying, discovered years later in his footlocker. It spoke of duty and honor and the men he served beside. It spoke of coming home to his daughter, of teaching her to ride a bike, of watching her grow. "She's growing, Sean," Derek said to the stone, "and we're all here watching, making sure she knows she's loved, making sure she knows what you gave up so we could live." As they prepared to leave, other cemetery visitors watched the procession. 17 motorcycles, each one bearing a rider in leather and medals, and in the center, riding in Derek's sidecar, a small girl with red curls and a jacket that proclaimed her legacy. That evening, the compound hosted a celebration, not of the adoption that felt too raw, too complicated, but of family, of summer, of survival. Grills smoked with burgers. Children played tag in the grass. Wives and partners laughed together, this community of people bound by service and its aftermath. Nora sat on the porch steps, watching it all with the careful observation of someone learning to trust happiness. Claire settled beside her, offering a plate of food without pressure or expectation. "Overwhelming?" Claire asked gently. "A little," Nora admitted. "I keep thinking I'll wake up and be back in the apartment, alone and hungry and waiting for Mom to come home." "That won't happen," Claire said firmly. "This is your home now. These are your people. And even when it feels too good to be true, even when you're scared it might disappear, it won't. We're not going anywhere." Mouse's daughter called from the treehouse, inviting Nora to join a game. And this time, Nora went without checking for permission, without that careful hesitation. She ran across the grass like a child should run, carelessly, joyfully, without the weight of adult worries. Derek watched from the grill, spatula in hand, and felt something in his chest ease. The nightmares still came sometimes, the survivor's guilt still pressed, but he'd fulfilled the promise. He'd found Sean's daughter. He'd given her safety and family and the childhood her father had died trying to protect. He'd be proud, Wheels said, appearing at Derek's elbow. "Of all of this, of what we built, of how we honored him." "I hope so," Derek said. "God, I hope so." As night fell, the children were called down from the treehouse. Nora came reluctantly, grass-stained and breathless, looking more like a regular kid than the solemn child who'd waited on that police station bench. Claire tucked her into bed, the routine becoming familiar and comforting. "Story?" Nora asked hopefully. Claire settled on the edge of the bed. "What kind of story? Tell me about when you met Derek, about how you knew he was good even though he was sad." So Claire told the story she'd told before and would tell many times again, about a broken soldier at a veterans support group, about recognizing pain in someone else's eyes, about choosing to love someone who carried ghosts, because love was about seeing someone fully and choosing them anyway. "Did you know about my dad?" Nora asked. "Did you know Derek was looking for me?" "I knew," Claire said softly. "From our second date, he told me about the promise he'd made, about the captain who'd saved his life, about the daughter with red hair he needed to find. Some people might have run from that, from loving a man who was devoted to another man's memory. But I understood that Derek's loyalty was what made him worth loving. that his commitment to keeping promises meant I could trust him with my heart. "I'm glad he found you first," Nora said, her eyes growing heavy. "I needed a mom too." Claire's eyes filled, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm glad too, sweetheart. So glad." The summer continued, each day building normalcy. Nora started calling Derek and Claire Dad and Mom, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. She made friends at school, invited them over, began to believe that stability could last. The Sentinels became her extended family, each one taking their role seriously. In September, Derek received a letter from Afghanistan. A young soldier who'd heard about the Sentinels had written, asking if the group accepted new members. He'd lost his entire fire team to an IED. He was drowning in guilt, in the senselessness of survival. He needed brothers who understood. Derek showed the letter to Nora over breakfast. "What do you think? Should we help him?" Nora looked at the photograph of her father on the wall, then back at Derek. "Daddy helped you. You helped me. I think we should help him too. That's what family does." So the Sentinels expanded, welcoming new veterans who needed brotherhood and purpose. The compound grew with them. More workshops, more gardens, more life built from the ashes of war. And at the center of it all, Nora thrived. On the anniversary of Sean's death, the Sentinels held a memorial ride. They traveled 300 miles to the cemetery, picking up other veteran riders along the way. By the time they reached Sean's grave, over 100 motorcycles formed the procession. Nora walked among them, no longer shy, greeting riders who'd come to honor her father. She'd learned their names, their stories, their scars. She understood that her father's sacrifice had created ripples that spread far beyond one moment in the desert. At the graveside, she stood before the crowd of leather and chrome and metals, and she spoke. "My dad died when I was 4, she began, her voice small but steady. "I don't remember him much, just feelings and pictures and stories people tell me. But I know he was brave. I know he saved Derek and Mouse and Wheels. I know he loved me and my mom, even though we fell apart after he died." She looked at Derek, drawing strength. "I was alone for a long time, scared and hungry, and trying to take care of myself because there was nobody else. But my dad made people promise to look for me, and they did. For 3 years, they searched, and when they found me, they didn't just rescue me. They gave me a family, a home, a future." Her hand found the photograph in her jacket pocket. "I think my dad knew that soldiers are strongest together, that we're supposed to take care of each other. So that's what I want to do. When I grow up, I want to help people who are alone and scared. I want to keep the promise going." The riders stood silent, many with tears tracking down weathered faces. This child who'd inherited her father's courage was teaching them about legacy, about how sacrifice multiplied across time and lives. Derek lifted Nora onto his shoulders so everyone could see her. "This is Captain Sean Fitzpatrick's daughter," he announced. "This is why we ride. This is why we serve. This is why we never stop looking out for each other. Because when we make a promise to a fallen brother, we keep it. No matter how long it takes, no matter how hard the search." The motorcycles started in unison, a thunder that rolled across the cemetery. They rode out in formation, Nora riding in the sidecar, her small hand raised in salute to the rows of white headstones. Each one represented a story. Each one had left behind people who needed brothers and sisters to find them. Seasons turned. Nora grew taller, her red curls tamed into braids, her freckles multiplying with time in the sun. She learned to ride her own motorcycle, a small dirt bike first, then bigger as she grew. She helped in the Sentinel's garage, learning mechanics alongside veterans who found peace in fixing what was broken. On her 13th birthday, the Sentinels presented her with a vest of her own, not a full patch that was earned, not given, but a vest that proclaimed her legacy, with a patch of her father's military unit and a ribbon that said, "Gold Star Child." She wore it with pride, this girl who'd been rescued by thunder and raised by warriors. She volunteered at the VA hospital, befriending veterans who reminded her of Derek and the others. She spoke at schools about military families, about the cost of service, about how sacrifice extended beyond the battlefield. Lindsay emerged from treatment after 18 months, fragile but fighting. The meetings with Nora were supervised at first, awkward conversations in neutral spaces. But slowly, Carefully, they rebuilt something. Not what had been, that was gone, destroyed by grief and addiction, but something new, honest about its limitations. "You have a good family," Lindsay told Nora during one visit. "Better than I could give you. That's hard to admit, but it's true." "You're still my family too," Nora said. "Just different now." Derek says families come in all shapes, says what matters is showing up and being honest. Lindsay smiled through tears. "Derek's a wise man. Your father chose good people to trust." On Nora's 16th birthday, the Sentinels held a ceremony. Before the assembled brothers and families, Derek presented Nora with her father's dog tags. They'd been held in trust, waiting for her to be old enough to understand their weight. "Your father wore these in Afghanistan," Derek said, placing them in her hands. "He wore them the day he saved my life, the day he saved all our lives. They represent his service, his sacrifice, his commitment to never leaving a brother behind." Nora clutched the metal tags, warm from Derek's hands. She could see her father's name stamped in the metal, his service number, his blood type. The tags had touched his skin, had absorbed his sweat, had been present for his final choice. "I don't know if I can be as brave as him," she whispered. "You already are," Claire said, stepping forward. "You survived things children shouldn't survive. You forgave your mother. You opened your heart to strangers. You chose to trust when you had every reason not to. That's a different kind of courage, but it's just as real." Mouse, now graying at the temples, nodded. "Your father's courage was one moment. Yours has been every day since we found you. Every time you chose hope over fear. Every time you believed in tomorrow." The ceremony continued with other presentations. Preacher gave her a leather-bound journal filled with stories about Sean, collected from soldiers who'd served with him. Wheels gave her a scholarship to college, funded by the club. Other Sentinels gave gifts both practical and sentimental, each one a thread in the tapestry of family they'd woven around her. As the sun set over the compound, Nora stood on the porch where she'd first arrived 8 years ago. She was taller now, her red curls long and wild, her freckles a constellation across her nose and cheeks. She wore her father's dog tags and her own vest, standing between two identities, Gold Star Child and Sentinel Legacy. Derek joined her, his own hair showing silver now, his body carrying the aches of age and old injuries. But his eyes were clearer than they'd been in years. Purpose had burned away the worst of the survivor's guilt, leaving him with peace he'd never expected to find. "Thank you," Nora said quietly, "for not giving up, for spending 3 years looking for a kid you'd never met, for keeping a promise to a man who died." "Sean gave me a gift," Derek said. "He gave me more years, more time to live and love and build. The least I could do was make sure his daughter had the same chance. Make sure you knew you came from a hero. Make sure you never felt alone again." "I don't," Nora said. "Feel alone, I mean. Even when I'm by myself, I know I have all of you. I know there are 16 motorcycles that would ride to me, if I called. I know there's a family that chose me even though they didn't have to." The motorcycles started in the distance, brothers arriving for the evening's celebration. The sound that had once terrified a town now brought comfort, signaling the arrival of family and the fulfillment of promises. Thunder that announced not threat, but protection. Nora walked down the steps to greet them, Derek at her side. The compound filled with noise and laughter, with children running and adults talking, with the rich chaos of community. She moved through it all, hugging veterans and their families, accepting birthday wishes, belonging completely. In a small town hours away, a police station sat quiet. Officer Hayes, now promoted to sergeant, sometimes thought about the child she'd covered with her jacket. She'd made one unauthorized phone call, broken one rule to mention a dead captain's name to a military liaison. That single act had changed everything, had set in motion a rescue she could never have imagined. She'd received a letter from Nora on her 16th birthday, a thank you for calling, for caring, for seeing that a child needed more than the system could provide. The letter was accompanied by a photo of Nora surrounded by sentinels, all of them grinning at the camera. On the back, Nora had written, "You were the first person who helped. You started everything." Hayes kept the photo on her desk, a reminder that sometimes rules needed breaking, that sometimes the right thing lived outside procedure, that sometimes a single call to the right people could save a life. As Nora's birthday celebration continued into the evening, she found herself drawn to the memorial wall in the clubhouse. The Sentinels had created it years ago. Photographs of fallen brothers, medals they'd earned, flags they'd served under. Sean's photo held the place of honor, surrounded by images of the other soldiers who died too young. But the wall had grown. It now included photos of Gold Star families the Sentinels had helped, single mothers who'd needed housing, children who'd needed mentors, veterans who'd needed employment. Each face represented a promise kept, a life changed, a legacy honored. Nora added her own contribution that evening, a photograph of herself at 8 years old, sitting on that police station bench. She placed it next to her father's photo, creating a before and after that told the whole story. From abandonment to adoption, from fear to family, from alone to surrounded by thunder. "Your promise kept me alive," she whispered to her father's image. "And now I'm making my own promises. To help other kids who are alone. To honor what you started. To make sure the legacy continues." The night deepened. The celebration wound down. Families headed home, promising to return for the next gathering. Nora helped clean up, moving through familiar routines in a place that had become the center of her world. Claire found her in the kitchen, drying dishes with the methodical care she'd learned years ago. "Tired?" "Happy tired," Nora said. "The good kind." "Your father would be so proud," Claire said, wrapping an arm around Nora's shoulders. "Of who you've become, of the life you're building, of how you took the worst thing that could happen and somehow created something beautiful from it." "I had help," Nora said simply. "I had Derek and you and all the Sentinels. I had people who refused to let me fall through the cracks." Later, in her room under the projected stars, Nora placed her father's dog tags on the nightstand beside his photograph. 8 years had passed since Derek had knelt before her in that police station, had promised that she wasn't alone. 8 years of learning that family was choice and commitment, that brotherhood transcended blood, that promises made to the dead shaped the lives of the living. She'd been rescued by Thunder, this child who'd waited on a bench for a mother who couldn't come. She'd been claimed by warriors who'd owed her father everything. She'd been raised by a community that understood that taking care of each other was the only way any of them survived. The motorcycles sat silent in the garage, waiting for tomorrow's ride. But Nora could still hear them if she tried, that rolling thunder that had announced her rescue, that had proclaimed her worth, that had promised she would never be alone again. The sound had terrified her at first. Now it was the sound of home. Outside, Derek and Claire sat on the porch, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. They'd raised Sean's daughter, this fierce girl with red curls and her father's courage. They'd kept the promise. They'd honored the debt. And in doing so, they'd found their own redemption, their own healing, their own reason for surviving when so many hadn't. "Think Sean knows?" Claire asked quietly. Derek looked up at the stars, the same stars that had hung over Afghanistan when his captain had made his final choice. "Yeah," he said. "I think he knows. I think he's been watching all along, making sure we found her, making sure we got it right." The night settled around them, peaceful and full of promise. Somewhere in the darkness, a child slept secure in the knowledge that she was loved, protected, claimed by people who'd crossed years and miles to find her. Thunder had come for her. Brotherhood had saved her, and in the morning, she would wake to a family that chose her every single day. The legacy lived on. If you have enjoyed the story, tell YouTube to send you more stories like this by subscribing to this channel, liking the video, and leaving a comment.